Bob, it's great to meet again together.
Wonderful to be with you, Martin.
And what I would like to do is sort of make the combination between the two books. With the two books we already talked about before. So Spirit of Kaizen and Mastering Fear, especially also focused on, let's say, what's happening on the work floor, in the coaching, in the training area, especially talking about these the typical things that happen. And I thought it would be great to hear your suggestions for leaders, for people that do the coaching, to help them out. What could be behind the reaction of people? Huh? Mm-hmm. And first of all, I was thinking about the actuality here nowadays. So the situation around COVID-19, it leads with by many governments, companies to what they say, like looking like a rabbit in the headlights of a car, and still we know it's happening and we're still too late or something. Now, what do you think are processes behind this reaction to fear, and what would be your advice in that? So how to overcome this fear, or what is your thinking around this whole process?
It's really very, very challenging in a management or leadership role, because what we know from how people deal with fear is, for some people, talking about it and trying to get a help for it is a very useful tool. Other people are coping with it by just continuing to focus on work and going home. And if you bring it up and encourage them to talk about it, you actually make them worse. So it really needs to be an individual strategy of asking people how they're doing, and asking them if they need help. And if they say no, and they're continuing to function effectively in the workplace, to let them be. It's the people who are struggling with challenges at home that are distracting them from work that may need our assistance. So it's really difficult and dangerous to come up with kind of a general program. Like, for example, having an assembly where where somebody comes in and talks about fear and whatnot, can be very useful in a brief sense, 20, 30 minutes. Beyond that, and trying to have groups where people discuss their fears, some people it makes worse, the opposite of what we thought.
Yeah, because what you say, there's no general way of looking at it. Yeah.
Because people respond to fear so differently, yeah. and the COVID crisis is different for everybody. Those who have children are dealing with it have a whole different set of challenges. People whose children have to stay home because of school policies. Sometimes their partner has lost their job or not. Because there's so many variables, it's very hard to generalize about it, other than to try to address each individual and to look to see if there's any impairments in performance in your staff, so you can try to address and see if this is the cause, if their relationship to fear is unhealthy, and that's diminishing their ability to concentrate and focus at work. So the other thing we look at is to see because again, one of the things people do with fear is sometimes they turn it into anger and take it out on other people. And there's obviously no good place for that in the work setting. And so if there's increasing conflicts, we want to look to see if this is fears from home, understandable fears, but fears they're coping with in a very unhealthy and inappropriate way.
Because what you don't want to do is what also leaders say, I don't want to put it all negative on the agenda, because there could be people that are not focused on it, and then I bring everyone to this negative momentum.
That's exactly
so not
right.
Ignoring it, but just keep it.
Yes.
So you're saying just mention it, give people the opportunity maybe to reach out for help, but not make it a big thing, bigger than, because there's an individual way of how people handle it. This is what you're saying,
yes.
Correct?
Yes, because we know from an enormous amount of research, as they've gone in after floods or hurricanes or the volcano in Europe, that each of these traumas affects people differently. And about 25% of people at the most end up with what we call post-traumatic stress disorder, where the fear has essentially become a very destructive part of their physiology, their health, as well as their relationships and their work success. For the rest of people, they tend to cope with it much better. And you don't know when you're looking at any one employee if they're part of that 25% or not. So, and for some people, coming to work and focusing on doing what they can do and having control in the work setting that's the best thing they can do, is come to work and perform well. So again, we're looking for any diminished performance and trying to seek those people out to see if we can help them.
Yeah, I think it's a very helpful answer to how to deal with this situation, especially also for leaders.
Right.
In their
It's not intuitive, because we just thought that having everybody get together and work on whatever the trauma is, that having the group together was going to be a good idea, but there's no research that's borne that out.
Yeah, it's clear. Yeah. Well, thanks.
Sure.
Now then, we spoke about it a lot already, but there's never enough. Talking about situation on the work floor, factory, and then shift leaders. The ones that I coach, I hear the story as well from colleagues. Then we say, okay, we coach them. We make them enthusiastic, especially when I talk about the brain, people love it. The amygdala, the hippocampus. We have fun about what's happening. And you say, oh, this is really, some basics, how we are, as people. And people recognize themselves. Now, then they get enthusiastic, and they go for it and they work on it. But there are some general issues they face, which I would like to share with you and hear your comments, your suggestions, saying how to move in that area. I mean, it's always, the guys are busy. They have the 5 minutes or 10 minutes moments with their team, The numbers are already from the day before. You ask them how it's going, what's planned, what is the success, etc. And then they try to connect with their people. So there's not like hours to share with people individually. It's like, you're doing the stuff, there's this 5-10 minute moments, and later on. Now, what happens a lot, there are always operators that ignore their, let's say, team leader. Huh? And of course you could, so they ignore a reaction like, can you do this? They're quiet, they just ignore. What do you think is this type related to fear or reaction, and what would be a suggestion? Push harder or give room? What's your idea?
In this scenario you're describing, is this quiet person still performing satisfactory? Or?
It's performing, but you ask people many times, like, do we have a suggestion? Is there any question for help, And then generally it could be very experienced people are very quiet. Like, maybe it's going to, it's flying away, again, but it's not. They just ignore and they do their stuff. So they're not integrating in this process. And then team leaders try to push harder. They have to do with it, what to do.
Right. There's no, the answer actually takes some time, where you come up to that person individually and say, how are things going? Is there, hi. And if you can find out the names of their children, ask how their kids are doing, to try to build some kind of trust. Often these people are very knowledgeable, but very frightened, and are afraid they're going to, if they bring something up, that they're going to be viewed as criticizing, or if they're not sure about something, they're going to be looked at as deficient. So you don't know which of those fears is causing them to be quiet, or if they're just shy. So to bring them out, and again, it's good news is that these techniques don't take time, they just take consistency. So trying to find some bridge to that person, either through their kids, what they're going to do. I notice you have a vacation coming up in 2 weeks. Where are you going on your holiday? How's COVID affecting your holiday plans? Just 1 or 2 questions as you're passing through the floor, to try to build some kind of trust and relationship. It also helps if you have the opportunity to model bringing up questions, doubts. When I started, I was doing the same job as yours. There were times when I wasn't sure about is that something you've encountered? And if they say no, you just keep moving on. So you're just kind of planting seeds over the course of time. You don't have to do it every day, but every couple, 3 days, so that you're essentially trying to build a trusting relationship with this individual. You do it through, again, role modeling, and through small moments where you're trying to build some kind of connection to this person. And again, that works best if the rest of the team is more outgoing and more forthcoming and is giving you many more suggestions and ideas and is more frank and honest with you. So if it's just one or two individuals that you're having this issue with, those are the strategies we recommend.
Yeah. Keyword I hear is trust. I agree that
Yes.
many times we're too easily focused on content, asking for what do you think is happening. It's always about the process. And then
Yes.
you're suggesting invest in these easy questions to build trust, to build a relationship. Is not about the numbers, it's about the person.
Right. Yeah. And again, sometimes the other strategy that sometimes is useful, because again, sometimes these people are just shy, sometimes they're afraid, is if there's anything you can appropriately compliment them for. You really did a really good job with such and such. I really appreciate how
I know.
you stepped up and helped so and so. Just brief, but and you can do it again through email if that's appropriate, but on a work floor, on a manufacturing floor, probably not. But just again, a brief compliment so that people start to feel some sense of trust. Because as you and I have talked about, Google did this something called the Aristotle Project, where they were trying to determine what made a team successful. And they had 250 data points and couldn't figure it out until a new book came out last year called The Fearless Organization. And then everything fell into place, that the single key ingredient they found in a successful team is that everyone on the team felt, for the first and most important thing is everyone felt that they could bring their mistakes, questions, doubts to other team members, that they would be trusted and valued and wouldn't be punished for not knowing something or for
I know.
being afraid or making mistakes. Number two was that dependability, and that is that if somebody said they were going to do something, they would actually follow through and do it. Number three was clear goals. And fourth is feeling that your work was meaningful. You got some sense of meaning and purpose from the work you were doing. Those were the four things. But number one, everything was a distant second, third, or fourth, was what they were calling psychological safety or interpersonal trust. So if the issues beyond one person we start to look at is the leader of that team making it safe for people to bring questions, doubts, criticism, suggestions to higher ups.
Yeah. One of the risks I was also thinking about is that what you shared in the book about the CEO sort of interpreting already what she saw, saying people are afraid of a reorganization and they don't hate and blah blah blah.
Right.
And you just asking people what's she doesn't have time for us anymore. You remember this story?
Yeah.
This was also like an example. I spoke to one of the general managers last week, and he said, "Yeah, people think this, think that. They're worried about the COVID and about the clients." I said, "Okay, so how do you know this?" And he looked at me like,
Great question.
"Yeah, exactly. But did you ask them?" And that was really because of this story you shared in the book.
Yeah.
It's an easy way that you interpret already why they, why they
Yes.
do what they do, and we should just ask people, correct?
Yes. And companies like Google actually train their employees to be curious and ask questions, because as you've already discovered in your personal experience and your work experience, when the amygdala is on, when people are stressed or afraid, curiosity is the first thing that goes out the window. And that's when we need it the most, is when things are difficult, to go to questions first to try to gather information before we start making decisions. But again, under time pressure, curiosity and open-ended curious questions are the first thing we lose unless we train ourselves to stay curious, particularly if it's a difficult employee. If you got somebody that's not living up to your expectations, the fastest thing to do is to just tell them shape up. But often that doesn't work. But it's taking a few moments to find out. I noticed that you're not meeting what you agreed to do. Can we talk about what's going on? Because I know you're a hard worker and care about the job. Help me understand. But again, there's nothing
Okay.
natural about talking that way. It's not the way human beings talk.
No.
You can train yourself to go to curiosity first. And Google actually does trainings with their employees to try to get the managers Because Google did a study on why people leave their jobs, and the single most reason was their boss. If they didn't feel that the person they were working for cared for them, respected them.
It's so, yeah.
And again, everybody gets busy. People are under enormous pressure. The words roll off my tongue, but you have to train your managers so that this becomes second nature. Because again, under the pressure of time and all the other things coming at us, to stay curious when you don't have time and this person is really causing you difficulty, it takes a lot of skill.
Yeah, and practice, yeah, correct, yeah. Just practicing a lot, huh?
Yes.
I agree that it is more and more into my routines based on practice every day. That's also what you share, even yourself are constantly practicing yourself, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's also great to hear that. Yeah, so that touched a little bit on what I was thinking about, what people give back to me as well, when people ignore or stay quiet, you know, what I mentioned, like any ideas to improve. That's exactly what you say. Build on the trust, continue questioning, small questioning and questions and open questions, correct?
Yes.
Now, what I also think is a very, was for me a surprising effect is the way we praise people. And in the book Mastering Fear, you also explained the research Dr. Dweck, talking about the young children. I thought this may be a great example from your side to explain how you also interpret this for leaders, how to sort of connect and communicate the right way to people to keep them challenged in the learning modes instead of being afraid of, you know, making a mistake.
Yes. Yeah. That there's actually research. I'm looking for the here. Oh yeah, here it is. Dr. Dweck at Stanford originally did work with children, looking at what type of attention was helpful and what time wasn't. And then being at Stanford, she's in the middle of Silicon Valley. She was doing work, of course, with those companies as well. And what they found, starting with children, is as well-intentioned as it is, praising children for how gifted, talented, and brilliant they are. Again, well-intentioned, but sets them up for a lifetime of pain. Because as you've discovered, as are all of us, as you go along, work gets harder and more challenging. You're surrounded with brighter and brighter people. If you're gifted and talented, everything should still come easy. And as we've all discovered, that's not the way it works. Life gets more challenging. So what you praise people for is effort, how hard they're working, and that sets them up for a lifetime of learning. Because as when life gets difficult, when the work gets challenging, what you're holding yourself accountable for is, am I doing my best? Am I working as hard as I can and trying to do my best? And you don't think of yourself, you think of that as very challenging. So again, what she came up with adults, and I'll read you her list, and I'll ask you again, if you imagine having somebody work for you, and this was their mindset, to use her words, reward employees for taking initiative, for seeing a difficult task through, for struggling and learning something new, for being undaunted by a setback, for being open to and acting on criticism. Whether it's a friend, a mate, a romantic partner, an employee, if that was how they approached a difficult time in the business, wouldn't that make your life infinitely easier? And so what she's recommending is those are the things you reward people for. When you hire them, you tell them this is what's expected, and this is what you hold them accountable for when you're doing reviews, so that people feel that this is what is expected of them. And then, of course, they're open to change and improvement. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I was just, sorry, I was just thinking many times when we have this conversation once a year or more times a year about performance, people focus on, okay, what were the goals? What were the numbers?
Right.
And much more the process behind it, like the ones you mentioned, are key to keep people really, you know, on the route of success, what you're saying. Also the connection, the trust comes with it.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, thanks about that. A few things I mentioned on the work for. Now, I was thinking about, one of the questions I'd like to ask you is the area of creativity.
Mhm.
Especially, you know, these days we have entrepreneurship is really challenged a lot. We need to stay creative, you know, in our business, new opportunities, things like that. Now, how to stay focused on creativity as a leader? You mentioned a lot about it in your chapter 7. And could you give us some insight around that topic from your side?
Sure. Um, there's a couple ways to think of it. I was just watching a lecture with a man named Ed Catmull, who um, it was a man who was a PhD in computer science who dreamed one day we would be able to make movies using computers, and got hired by George Lucas and then Steve Jobs and ran Pixar, which set motion picture history. Every movie they've made has been profitable, which has never happened in the history of motion pictures. And
Mm.
now, of course, he's the head of movies for Disney. Um, and he was doing this talk at Stanford, and he said, I don't know how to help people be creative. I know how to squash their creativity. And of course, we all know how to do that um, by being judgmental and difficult and argumentative and criticizing people. Um, so some of what you do with creativity is stay out of people's way. The other, by not punishing any idea they come up with. So people come up to you with an idea and it's clear to you that this really isn't a very good idea. Can you find a way to compliment them? You know, I'm really glad you're thinking in these terms. Um, let's talk about this some more to see if we can find a way to take this to another level. Um, so trying to reward any suggestion that comes your way. I'm not suggesting formal suggestion plans. There's no research suggesting
Yeah.
those necessarily work very well. But if somebody comes up to you as you're walking through the plant floor and says, I think I've got an idea how to make things better, is your first response going to be enthusiastic and positive, or are you going to tell them why it won't work?
All
So
right.
you want to foster that kind of enthusiasm in your staff. Um, what some organizations do is they simply ask workers each frequently, or even put up a sign, um, what small step could we take to make the process or product better, so that people are thinking in those terms. The good news is there's no evidence suggesting you have to reward people financially for those ideas. Some of the Japanese firms that used to use financial incentives stopped because most people come to work wanting to be engaged, wanting to be focused, wanting to be proud at the end of the day what they're doing. As I said when I started, you can interfere with that desire, but it's hard to do anything other than stay out of the way of people who are trying to make things better. Um, and so, if people can be encouraged to bring their ideas to higher ups, um, and get rewarded for it, not financially, but in terms of praise and enthusiasm, you end up with a workforce that's highly engaged. The other problem with financial rewards is if you and I are working next to each other on some assembly line, and I've got an idea that I think would be helpful, and they're going to give me money if the idea works, am I going to bounce it off you before I send it up to management? Not likely. Exactly. So you really don't need financial rewards because people want to be engaged. So making it safe for people to do that, and asking them periodically, anything you could think of that we could be doing that would make this a better project or would make it easier, better for you to do your job. Because many of the breakthroughs that have come through in manufacturing and in service industries have come from some employee that had no business being on the creative end of it. Um, but was encouraged to talk about their ideas. For example, some of the breakthroughs in airline entertainment, the movie that we show, at least in the United States, some of the breakthroughs in terms of the technology came from a gate agent at Alaska Airlines. Now, again, this man's not getting paid to sit there and think about movies, but again, had a background in electronics, went into the airline industry, and brought those talents with him. So it's very hard to tell who in the organization is going to end up coming up with breakthrough ideas and services. The question is, do you make it safe for people to bring their ideas? I remember one time we asked Toyota, because they were bragging they could use over 90% of the ideas that people
Yeah.
brought to them. We asked them, what about the 10%? And they said, those are in some ways the best ones for us, because if somebody brings us an idea that really isn't very good, and in fact, sometimes these ideas are really kind of haywire, we know we haven't trained the person well, and now we can make sure they get the training they need before they mess something up.
Yeah.
And so any idea that comes your way, you need to show an enthusiasm for, and be grateful to that person. So you come back to them 2 or 3 days later and say, I really appreciate that conversation we had yesterday. I've been thinking about your idea, and I'm really glad that you're on that track of thinking what we can do better. Nice work. So, and people carry that, some people carry those kind of compliments for days and weeks, the way a camel carries water.
That's true. Yeah. So there's so much value in communication, not always in the first type of communication, but also when we interpret what people say. That's also what you're telling. Saying, okay, if the answer is wrong, what's behind it? If what we just touched, saying ignoring or even people getting angry, what's behind it? And then try to understand, question ourselves, question the people. And then sometimes the answer is already a next step again for improvement, correct?
Yes. Yeah. And you need to be patient, because if you go up to somebody who's out of a machine doing work and you say anything that have you had any thoughts about any ways we could improve things, they may shrug their shoulders and you think, well, that didn't work. But again, the nice thing about questions is if you ask them periodically, the brain has to take it in, and in its own magical way starts popping out answers.
Oh yeah, hippocampus, correct?
Yes, exactly. Good. Well done.
But you mentioned the word patience. Could you write a book about that? How to build that in? Personally, I have a real hard struggle to stay patient.
Yes, there's a joke called the negotiator's prayer. Dear God, please give me patience, and can I have it right now?
That's how it works,
Yes.
Boom.
So again, some of it is we are impatient people, and some of it is, again, we're working in high pressure situations where we need to get results. We think the fastest way to get there is to push harder, but the brain doesn't work that way. So you're trying to build a culture, and you can't do that rapidly. You can do it, again, the good news is none of these steps take very many seconds or minutes, but it's the continuation over time that the brain builds this in, and your employees start realizing this is an important part of why I'm here, is my boss really wants to hear my ideas on how I could do things better.
And that links very nice, and it links actually nicely to a question I also have from the people that hear about how we talk about Kaizen. And that's really also something from the work floor, Bob. That's really, many companies have started their daily review. We just touched on it in a different way. But then they're very successful in this, this focus on KPIs, safety, quality, stuff like that. And then people get trained and there's a sort of rhythm and it really works, There's really, it works over weeks, months, people are trained and it's, but then we say it needs a couple of years to really being built in as a culture. But honestly, there's also a lot of companies that start suffering, saying, okay, it's getting worse. Action lists get longer and team leaders struggle to keep the machine sort of, in a good rhythm. And then the question is, what are mechanisms that could go wrong? On one hand, we say it's questioning. Maybe we didn't ask that much anymore. Could be one of the reasons, correct? That we sort of more into a performance management system instead of questioning each other.
Right.
Is it new people coming in? I don't think so. Many times it's even the experienced people that start suffering. What could be mechanisms behind, or even and also possible solutions to keep the vibe on, to keep it moving? Do you have ideas? Do you understand a little bit the struggle people get into sometimes?
Yes. And again, there's no easy solution to that. The one we find most commonly successful is the people that are feeling most overwhelmed and most burdened by the new demands and the increased quotas and whatever else are often the ones that they can think of a better way to do things. That they understand that this is a competitive industry. We need to be as productive as we can. we need to keep costs down and quality up. Often they get that, but they may, if anybody's going to come up with a solution in terms of how do we manage this better, reduce costs, increase quality, it's going to be the people doing the work. So seeing if we can mine them in terms of this rather than just keep burdening them with increased amounts of workload. So it's very difficult to have that kind of faith in your workforce, but that's where the solutions are most likely to come from. People that are being told, we get that what we're asking of you is very hard, and we don't want to be in a situation where you're making mistakes in order to get to a result. That's not going to serve you, me, or the customer. What can we do so that we can increase quality, reduce costs at the same time, both? And see if you can get information and wisdom from the people actually doing the work. I've seen that in the airline industry, where the man who started Southwest Airlines, one of the most successful airlines in the United States, they would ask the flight attendants, what could we do to make this more efficient and yet reduce costs? And they had lots of ideas. Some of them not so good. Some of them were actually saved the airline hundreds of thousands of dollars. And again, cost Southwest nothing, because again, people want to be engaged. You have young children. You know how curious children are by nature. What the question is, how do we get children who are that curious to grow up and maintain that curiosity about why are we doing things this way? Is there another way to do it? If you can keep those questions alive in your workforce, then you keep increasing productivity and again, reducing costs.
Well, this also to me explains, I remember also in my past managerial functions, I've switched managers, like I had a quality manager who was very good, focused on production. And he said they have to do it a different and better way. And I made him manager of production. Production manager was like, I need some better technical support. So I made him head of technical.
Brilliant.
And that was full trust, and people were all behind. And we really got what I call new energy.
Yeah.
But I think, in the words I'm learning also, is saying it's like, people getting from another angle, new ideas, new insight, start questioning the same things from a different angle, and they get new ideas, correct?
Yes, exactly.
So it asks also for flexibility. It means like, if we have people to work for, the more we also continue to train them on a normal way in flexibility, give them also opportunities to move to different areas, and they will have new ideas, correct?
Yes, yes. Yeah, and again, some of this is the beauty of Kaizen, because if you train your workforce that what's expected is to keep looking for small ways, no matter how small, to improve things, then people's mindset is we're supposed to come in every day trying to make this place better. So again, it keeps people engaged, excited, have a sense of purpose. They go home with a sense of pride. But again, none of this is easy to do if people have been used to managers that just said, do your job and stay quiet. Yeah. So you're trying to get people to be more engaged. I remember when Toyota first came up with that Anden cord, where they had a cord at each step of the assembly line. And if you felt that something on the car wasn't right, even if it had nothing to do with you putting on the right or left tire, you pulled this cord, which stopped the assembly line so we could fix it now. Everybody thought it was insane. How could you mass manufacture a product if you got your employees taking control of the assembly line and looking for flaws anywhere in the car? It turned out counterintuitively to be the most efficient way to build cars, and everybody's copied it.
Yep.
So the question is, are you training your workforce to look for small problems while they're so small and trivial that don't seem that important, so we can fix them before they become too important to ignore, and you lose your customers' trust?
One of the words you mentioned, like overwhelmed, people being overwhelmed. That's also a thing that popped in my mind, saying, okay, I remember one of my clients struggling with this energy, new ideas, stuff like that. And then he said, what would you suggest? And they had a huge board with a lot of KPIs. And I suggested saying, wipe it out and start, new, here's the pencil and try it again, because they were like focused on so many areas. And then my second thing was like, why being focused on all the areas every day, like a theme, this week we have the week of safety, or next week is quality.
Yeah.
But we need to focus on everything. Yes, they will stay focused on but we're talking about, improve.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think the word overwhelmed is also an issue, that we as management sometimes want everything together at once, and then also perfect.
Sure. Because we're getting pressure from our higher up. So it's easy to see why that can happen, but overwhelm is also kind of a grown-up word for fear. You've essentially triggered the amygdala in your workforce, and that doesn't make anybody creative. It just makes them think, how am I going to keep my head down and hope this blows over? Yeah.
Yeah, you even mentioned in your book here, you meant people feel shamed, correct?
Yes.
When you have these big questions, was also a surprising word the first time I read it. I said, yeah, people can feel ashamed. Do I really not give my boss what he wants? People feel like ashamed, correct?
Correct. Yes.
And that's also like a fear. They don't want to do that. They want to help you. They want to be supportive and help the company.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it takes enormous, it's the word, skill to train your workforce if they think the mistakes are being made, to bring those to you. The man who was a chief engineer at Boeing took over Ford, and his first day, he had 30 people from all of the Ford divisions, everywhere from Canada to South America to Europe at the time. And he said, "What's going wrong?" And nobody's hand went up. Nobody. He said, "Well, we're losing billions of dollars. Something's going wrong." And one person raised their hand and talked about a problem with a tailgate on a new SUV in Canada. And Mulally was his name, began applauding. The message being, if we know there's a problem, we can work on it. If we don't know, we'll find out when customers stop buying our cars. So these things sound easy, but they're very challenging to create a culture. And there's not a lot of room for error. So if an employee comes up to me while I'm walking through the shop floor and says, I think I may have made a mistake with something, you only have seconds to have your facial muscles and your voice tone say, "I'm glad you told me. Let's take a look and see what happened so we can see what we can do about it." And to train yourself to immediately go to a positive place so that people feel rewarded for bringing their struggles, their questions, their fears, their overwhelm to you. And that's a huge accomplishment.
Yeah. And it brings me also to the question I remember we touched on it last time, but I think it's such a great area when we talk about the inner voice, because that's our really tough one. Yes. Because it's always the one with us, and he talks us usually a little bit the negative side if we don't, if we're not, let's say, eager. And this inner voice, you're talking about, if I say this correct in wordings, in the tabernacle choir.
Tabernacle choir, yes. Yeah. I don't know if the Mormon Tabernacle choirs made it to the Netherlands. Every country has their own famous choir. I know.
Correct. But we're not allowed to sing, now. So in these days, it's very hard.
I know in the UK it's the King's College Choir. I don't know what it is in your country.
Yeah, we have also we have some very famous with Bach. This is fantastic music.
Yes. So the question is,
how to get there? How to keep the choir singing? Even in COVID times. So the voice.
The biggest challenge is realizing that for many of us, built into the amygdala is a harsh voice that got passed on from our parents and their parents and their parents' parents. So most of us don't even know it's there because it's been there all of our life. We think it's us. And the way I illustrate this to audiences is I'll say, how many of you think rejection is painful? Everybody's hand goes up. I'll say, well, let's see. I'll try to convince you that's not possible. People's eyes get kind of wide. I'll say, well, rejection comes in many, many forms, but romantic rejection is one form, yes? People say yes. I say, well, see, tell me if you would agree this is one form. I go up to a woman in the audience and I say, so Sally, If I say to Sally, Sally, would you like to go out with me Saturday night? And Sally says, you know, Bob, I'd like to, but I'm flossing on Saturday night. That usually gets a laugh. Is that rejection? Does that hurt? People say, yeah, that would hurt. So let's see if that's what happened. I went up to Sally, asked her out. She gave me that lame excuse. As I walked away, which of these two voices came on in my head automatically? Door number one. Boy, Bob, am I proud of you. Nice try. That was gutsy. Could have been a little smoother. Next time you'll do better. I am so proud of you for trying. All the time, the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, or whatever the choir is in your country, is singing the Hallelujah chorus from Handel's Messiah because of my willingness to live my dreams and pursue them. Door number one or door number two. Boy, did you sound like a jerk. Who wants to go out with you? You're old, you're ugly, you're fat, nobody likes you anyway. Which is more likely, one or two? Everybody agrees, two. So where was the pain in Sally saying no, or that conversation in my head walking away? The conversation. So this harsh voice has been there all of our life. It is software. It's no more who we are than whether you're speaking English to me or Dutch at home. You're still the same Martin with the same values, beliefs, and history. You're the same person. Language is just software. So is this harsh voice. But because it's been there all of our life, we think it's us. And so the biggest challenge for people is to realize that harshness, that harsh voice is there. It's not serving us. It doesn't serve the people we're taking it out on, whether it's our family or employees, and that you can reprogram that part of the brain. But I can't emphasize enough, the hardest part is convincing people that harsh voice is software. And if you think it's serving you and being judgmental and harsh you think is working for you, then let's leave it alone. It's rare that anyone's ever agreed with that statement. Otherwise, the way you reprogram it is using Kaizen with one or two techniques. Either develop your own Tabernacle Choir voice. What would I say to my best friend or my child if they were faced with that same dilemma? And rehearse that out loud. Why out loud? Because you're trying to build new learning into the amygdala. And every time you talk, the amygdala goes on. So you're trying to build new learning into the old mind. And you do that for 5-10 seconds at a time, 2-3 times a day, with enough repetition. Like you speak English perfectly, but I know you didn't learn it in one fell swoop. You learned it over time. The brain can't absorb everything at once. So you rehearse it, and one day the brain decides that's what he wants me to do instead, and the brain builds it in. The other way is to use mind sculpture, which we've talked about, a technique athletes all over the world use, where they practice their sport in their mind for minutes, sometimes as long as a half hour before they actually go out on the athletic field. So if you have an employee that's difficult, or you get uncomfortable around your boss, or trouble with your spouse's parent, whatever it is, you close your eyes for just 5-10 seconds at a time, picture yourself in that situation, and without moving a muscle, what you'd say, voice, tone, gestures. If I'm sitting down to do a review with an employee and things have not been going well, and I really need to give this person some challenging feedback, I'll try to rehearse with my mind's eye, imagining what I'd say, voice, tone, gestures, so that it comes out as perfect as possible when I'm actually faced with the person. Do that 5-10 seconds at a time, half dozen times a day. Because again, what the brain decides is important usually is repetition. Things you do routinely, the brain locks in. Things you don't do that often, the brain doesn't commit cells to. So, but again, I can't emphasize enough the hard parts of recognizing that harsh voice.
So I think, coming to a conclusion for today, I mean, we started about COVID, and there's also a lot of harsh voice in our mind as well. I mean, just try something new, and now is this second lockdown, and never gonna be successful, and nobody wants me anymore, things like that.
Exactly.
And get rid of the voice. Just look at, this is a new situation. Let's challenge. Let's see what we can do. Reach out for people. Ask for help. Ask them to, hey, I'm struggling here, or how do I do this? Could you help me? Or things like that. Reaching out for help. One of the advices in the book is what we're made for. And I have to admit that when I reach out for people in the current situation, it's amazing what people do. They really love to help you. Of course, it's friends, it's neighbors, it's people, and that's what we should do a lot, and get rid of the harsh force and build in the new ones. What you say?
Yes, exactly. Yes, because what happens with that harsh voice, if you're beating yourself up, is it sends the amygdala soaring, which shuts down the thinking brain. So you lose your creativity, you lose your flexibility, you lose your inventiveness. So more frightened people are, the less functional they are. So you're trying to get your workforce not to be frightened, but to be engaged, trying to calm your own fears. Again, a tall order, but that's the only reason you and I are doing this work, is because we find it so challenging and trying to serve other people.
Becoming a Kaizen choir, correct?
Exactly. Kaizen choir. I love that. I've never heard that phrase before. Well done, Bob.
Well, thanks, Bob, for this time, for the questions and the discussion we had.
Always.
Fantastic examples and suggestions and advices you give us.
Always a pleasure. I learn a great deal from talking with you as well. So
Oh yeah,
you're coaching me at the same time.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.